Hi, everyone. So 4 years ago, I was able to talk to Tara Gariano, and we were talking and a series that I was doing, which was called Makeup or Breakup, which really talked about people in relationships and what made them work, and how people had their own personal practices, people that work with other clinicians or healers around people, around coaching, around people who are trying to work on their relationships, what they were doing to help people get their own personal self-care practices and evolving practices. And so today we get to speak again. And I'm excited about our talk today because you're starting out this series that I'm going to be talking again to probably 30 days of 30 people, which is, I really am curious about how people have changed the way they work with folks. We talked 4 years ago, which was really the start of COVID, when we all went virtual constantly, where people were really seeking support. And I am just curious about how the folks that I've talked to back then are working differently now, and what people's needs are. Like, what's the thematic concerns people have? What are people stressing about? What are people focusing on in terms of relationships? And just your observations and what you've been yourself going through personally since COVID. I know that we don't talk about COVID much anymore, but it still seems like it's all something that we're recovering from, all something that I noticed myself trying to really re-engage back in community and in a different lifestyle than that very introverted lifestyle that I got used to. So how about you? What's been gelling in your world that you could share with me?
But yes, yes to all of that. I hear that. I agree. I feel like, yeah, there's something about this impact of COVID, this global pandemic that we're all still recovering from. There's this residual effect of, and what I see in terms of the couples that I'm seeing specifically is that there is more of a desire to deepen into the relationship and have a better understanding of how to make it more successful. So and maybe this is just part of being a couples therapist, is that people are wanting to really work on and create more intimacy as opposed to discard the relationship and let it go. What I find is that most of the clients that I'm seeing are really wanting to invest the time and the energy and the resources to understanding how they can make what it is that they have better and more workable for them.
Hmm. Yeah, it feels like during COVID, I don't know if you experienced this, but the residual effect on relationships was pretty intense. And a lot of relationships ended during that time, and a lot of relationships strengthened during that time. Like, people look back at it and say, wow, that was really hard, but we got through it. We got through, like, seeing each other in sweatpants and no lipstick and no fun times like outside, like just cooking and at home and things. No community, no dates, no fun music, outside concerts or whatever were okay. But now I am seeing myself too, that people are more serious either about moving forward in their life and really doing the things that they want, or trying to have the kinds of relationships that they want.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, and I think what I also hear in that is like this constant monotony of being together, working together, living together, and then how to have more fun in all of that, or where is the celebration in that? And I would say that that's a big residual piece that I see, is that couples then are wanting to understand how to create that erotic space for themselves as a couple, because they still are living together and they still are working together and they still are experiencing some of this monotony, even though they can go out in the world. But then how do they create more intimacy?
Right. So that part doesn't change, right? The whole idea about how do you create space to be in an erotic relationship, to have intimacy, and not just go into the doldrums of a 24/7 roommate lifestyle. Right. So
Hmm.
that's sort of some of the stuckness that people get into in relationships, which ends relationships in some ways, or it becomes an unsatisfying connection. Right. So
But I think it's
um,
intensified with the COVID because a lot more people are still working from home, whereas prior to the pandemic, they weren't working from home. And so now there's this home life, work
mhm.
life, erotic life balance that wasn't necessarily in place, because when people leave their home and they come home, even that break can create more of an erotic space, because there's a little bit of mystery. I don't know really where you went. I don't know what you really experienced. I imagined you went to work, and then how, and then coming back together, there is maybe a little bit more of opportunity for spark, but same all the time is, it's more difficult.
Right. And also that the person who goes out into the world, like when we all were going out into the world, we had a lot of stimulation. We had lots of conversations, whether they were just with the coffee shop guy or the person that like we parked near or something like that. So there was more interest and more, like I always think about the couple concept of bidding interest, that there it's interesting to share your day with someone. If they've seen you in the kitchen all day or in your office and you meet in the kitchen, then they know where your day's been and you've had those little blips of conversation. So how do you sort of spice it up? How do you spark it up? How does it become something that is, what's the word? I don't know, unique or refreshing or new or exciting? Like how do you do that? So what are some of the ways that you are finding yourself like helping clients in that space, or what are the success stories that you're hearing about?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I do find that that's a critical piece of how then are couples cultivating that eros. And so one of the things, because we can go out into the world now, is this encouragement to go out into the world and have relationships with others in terms of friends and supports and being outside of the home, so that they can have this experience of coming back. And then also, right, intentionally setting, and this is a big one that I've used for a long time, intentionally setting date nights where there's more structure and form, where there's a giver and a receiver, where they're really dropping in with each other in a way that's beyond the convenience of, I don't want to cook, you don't want to do the dishes, let's go out for dinner, right? Something more meaningful than that. And then that seems to be a simple way where a lot of couples can then begin to connect. And again, it's not anything that revolutionary or anything that was different than prior to the pandemic. And also just this reminder of that is available, and that you can begin to do that now. And a lot of what I'm suggesting to couples isn't so much what, it's really the refocus of how. How are you bringing your attention and intention to this experience of being in relationship? And just that refocus of attention seems to begin to shift things for a lot of couples. And it takes some diligence.
Mhm. Yeah, I like the whole idea about date night being an intentional thing, that you actually talk about what the intention is of getting together, and it really is about trying to have a different time together, or trying to have a giver and a receiver, trying to have some format. Like, what do you want to have happen tonight? What do you or today? What kinds of things are going to make you feel close to me, or what ways do you want to connect, or um, are we going to have sex during this date night or not? Or are we just going to, we're so burnt out, we're like at 20%. So are we just going to just enjoy each other's company somewhere and not have to have the same routine of cooking, cleaning happening. So, I think being intentional and having a mindset, like really paying attention to the relationship, too, paying attention. I think, and maybe you can relate to this too, just in a general way, is that relationships are sort of fragile, you know, and I think we
Yeah.
put a lot of stress on them, in terms of that we
Yes.
expect a lot from them. Um, and sometimes we have to really communicate that maybe we're not appreciating the relationship as its own entity, like you said, the word eros, right? So I wonder if you could describe like what you mean by that term and how you use it with couples.
Yeah, and I just love this sentiment, Susan, that the relationship is fragile, because I do subscribe to that as well, and I often find that I forget. I see my clients forget, and it's this opportunity to remember that there is, um, I would say, a need for attentiveness that is gentle, right? That we often do place those demands on our relationship, that it can be durable and withstanding even when we don't show up as our best self. And I think the introduction of eros is this reminder of coming into this erotic space together and maybe showing up a little bit differently, maybe showing up maybe more as your shiny best self as opposed to your worn down debilitated self. And so really coming back to how then are you refreshing yourself, so this way you can come to this erotic space that you want to create with your beloved to have more intimacy. And what I find is that it often begins with oneself, that we need to tend to ourselves, restore ourselves, refresh ourselves, even if it's just a few minutes of just walking around the block and being outside and being in fresh air. So this way, then we can come back to our beloved and have a different state of mind, a more open heart. So this way, we can come into a place where we can invite them. And that's a
Yeah.
big piece, is what I see, is this cultivation of this invitation. Because what I often see is when we get stuck in these patterns where we're expecting the relationship to hold so much, there are demands and expectations and assumptions, and that's never really that sexy. And it also is really hard and harmful to the relationship because it's not holding it with the lightness that also needs to be there in the relationship. And so, what kind of levity can one bring to that space to create more erotic intimacy and also movement, right? I'd say there needs to be some more fluidity in that space. And so, really stepping into the unknown and allowing oneself to be imaginative and playful and creative, often things that sometimes can make us feel uncomfortable because we're such adults. Like we have so many stresses and things that we need to tend to in the mundane world.
Hmm. Yeah. So it's like that, put your cell phone down, don't check your email, and don't worry about your schedule tomorrow, but really prepare yourself. If you're going to have an intentional date night, and I reference like have being on 20%, you know, and I was listening to something yesterday that was talking about family life and people raising kids and how that's so stressful on a relationship, and that this particular couple was setting up a real intention about they thought together and met together about they both had big careers, but they were really like, we have to be intentional about how we were doing this family thing because it's going to put so much stress on our relationship, but we don't want the family life to be about our relationship. So it was either kid focused, couple focused, or family focused. And for the time that they were raising kids, they talked about family focus, which was having the time together, and choosing how they had time as a family. Like if someone had obligations outside the family, that they talked about how that impacted everybody in the family. So if there was like too many sport activities or too many work travel trips on the parents' part, that all of that creates stress in the family. And then the family relationship becomes very stressed too. So they talked about like how much the family could take without, um, that would start affecting the bonding and the relationships between us. And I thought that was so smart, structurally. And then thinking back into a couple, if you're, whether you're raising a family or you're just trying to maintain your couple, then you have your own couple bubble too, that within that bubble, there has to be this internal balance. So it also has to be a place that you're not like throwing all your problems into that bubble, right? It has to,
Correct. Yes.
yeah,
Not a
there has to be a
receptacle.
little
Yeah.
space in there for each individual to have playfulness, to have fun. So so some of it I think is the life balance part and the self-care part, and in life we maybe we don't have good models of that, maybe we do. um I got to watch that when I was, as I was telling you earlier, I went to a family wedding and I got to watch how everyone showed up, myself included, flying across the country, and just seeing like who took care of themselves well and how stressed people were, because it's stressful. I mean, there's a lot of social activities, there's a lot, people are in fragile states, showing up by traveling so much and sort of being on the spot. And could everyone put their stress aside and actually have fun for this event, to celebrate love, right, to celebrate union, and not have it be all about, the plane was late and and they barely got to the event on time or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like what we were talking about, like how we show up in relationship. Like, how do we actually take care of ourselves enough and know how much self-care we need in order to show up the way we want to show up, to have the connections we want to have with
Yeah.
people.
Yeah. I love that. And I'm curious, I want to go back to the thought that you began with about the 20%.
Yeah, so this couple was also referencing the idea that they check in with each other, like, how spent are you from your week? And if someone's saying, because let's be real, right? Life is not like not stressful. And if you have a career and both parties have a career, there's going to be sometimes that people are taxed and they don't have any bandwidth. And the other person, like, if they always don't have any bandwidth, then that's the chronic problem that needs to be discussed. Like, hey, you never have any energy for the relationship. But if someone's saying, like, I have a killer work week this week because I'm traveling and I'm speaking and I'm doing whatever I'm doing in my career, in my work life, or with the kids, or in a family obligation, I'm like, I have this much energy left and none of it's probably going to go towards you. And the other person's like, well, I have 60. So I might be able to I'm able to ride out this date night and make it fun, and the energy is going to come from me. Maybe that's the giver receiver thing you were talking about.
Yes. Uh-huh. Yes. Yeah. I love that. Thank you. So the way I like to structure the dates is actually with a lot of structure. So it does feel more of an artifice. And I want the couples to be able to relax into that form because I feel like there's something about the reliability of it. Because if they continue to persist in the pattern in which they've already engaged, then they're going to get what they've always gotten. And so to really drop that and step into this feels so awkward, this feels so artificial. And what it is that first they create all the dates that they want to have, and they do that individually. Then they share them, and then as a giver, they choose the date that the other has already written down. So they already know it's going to be a home run, right? Because the other person's already named, this is absolutely what I want to do with you. And so then they've got a list of like maybe a dozen items. And then there's this fairness, right? I'm going to be a giver, you're going to be a receiver. And then next week, if that's the cadence that we choose, then you're going to be the giver and I'm going to be the receiver. And so that's kind of the artifice. So it's not necessarily dependent upon I'm 20%, I'm 60%, because you've already agreed upon it and you've already set the dates. So if there's travel, maybe it's not every Saturday night, maybe it's the 1st and the 15th. So you accommodate it to fit the flow of your life. But then there's this opportunity to build the anticipation of like, I know we're going to have this date. So I know I'm going to be filled at that moment with our relationship or from our relationship or from you as I will be the receiver or from me as I'm going to be the giver and I'm going to be able to do what I love to do best. And oftentimes what I find is that there's these ways that we show up in the relationship because we have tendencies. And so somebody's always planning the dates and they always do that because they like doing the logistics, they like doing the planning, maybe they like being in control. And then it's more difficult for them to be the receiver and give up control. Or maybe they just don't allow the other to set up the date because they may not do it as well. And then they don't get to be the receiver. And then the other person doesn't get to be the giver and they need to cultivate that skill as well. And so this artifice is set up in terms of dating. So this way they can both enhance their skills in giving and receiving. And then where the spontaneity or the novelty comes in is you don't need to tell them, I picked this item on this list because I think you'll like it. You can just say, show up with your hiking boots, right? So they don't know, they know something on the list that they have said they wanted to do, but there's some excitement that can be built into that, which I think is really important that the novelty is, sparked in that opportunity. And then what I like for the advanced level, I ask the giver to really incorporate the senses. What does it smell like? What does it taste like? What does it sound like? What does it feel like? What does it look like? And then it adds a whole nother dimension of, oh, I hadn't really thought about those things. Now, maybe in our courtship, I thought about those things because I had that hypervigilance of what things would be like. Does my breath smell? How do I look? What am I going to wear? And that tapers off. But to be able to come back to that remembrance of like, oh yeah, that did matter to me at some point, and how can I live into that today, is then cultivating a very different invitation for your beloved.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I love that. Okay. So this kind of passes by the percentage part because it is a commitment that people have made. And I'm sure that also with that is the flexibility of if someone's like, I'm really low energy and I can't go on that hike. It's like, well, we can substitute dates because we've got a bunch written down. So it's one of the, the low energy dates, like, going to, that fun movie theater we used to go to with the artistic movies or whatever, or doing a car ride up somewhere or something. So there could be that kind of thing if there is a bandwidth issue, like I don't have the bandwidth for a big 20-mile hike. But I think that's a really good way to think about it, is that that people are coming to the table with new ideas, with maybe even things that were done in the past, like or even brand new things to do. um I love it when I see couples have some internal traditions about how they reconnect after maybe a hard week, whether it's going out for a nice meal or also doing some more meditative type things to reset, and or even activities like going out dancing, or I don't know, going to the gym together or whatever it might be, to as their regular activities and ways that they connect with each other. I think
Mm,
that's so strong in terms of connection, to have those things that you weave into your relationships that are the things that you can count on with the other person. Like them in that space.
yes,
You know?
I love that. And I think that it varies from couples to couple, whether it is the dancing or it is going to the gym, and that each couple has their own flavor of what it is that they like to do. And what I see is that when couples are really focusing on being successful with each other, they have that. They have that characteristic of their relationship that they can drop into, that this is what we do together, and that this is what we enjoy in terms of how we like to be together. Just beautiful.
Yes. And then there's the other side of it. Like sometimes I think what happens is people, probably just very much like you in my work with couples, like my goal isn't to help people break up. It's to see if they can figure out how to stay together. But sometimes what it ends up being is that the relationship has just reached an incompatibility state. And that needs to be sort of acknowledged, right? Like it's incompatible now, that there isn't, like, it takes two, right? It takes two. But if people don't have the same image of what connection is, like that deep connection that you came in talking about, that people are longing for that, and if they're partnered with someone that really isn't going to go there, or doesn't want to go there, or has like that time past them, because sometimes relationships are long and there's lots of chapters in them. um and people might not have the energy to have deep connections after certain chapters in life, like age, or raising kids or things like that. I often see that cycle of um life, like life cycle, right? And people get into, like, they're tired, they've done the doldrums too long, they didn't break out of the patterns, and so there's too much of a wall up to break down, and they don't want the deep relationship anymore. They've kind of shut that possibility off. I think the ability to actually confront that and say that there's just a real incompatible difference around how we want to have relationship is so hard to get to, because it's so much easier to blame. And
Yeah,
and I think it's something that's very brave to do, in terms of, like, if one person is that one, to talk about how much they value the connection that they're seeking, and they're going towards a different kind of connection, that they would really rather have a deeper connection than the connection that they have. Does
that's
that make
beautiful.
sense? Yeah.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And it's a difficult and very brave and courageous conversation to have. And oftentimes I see that it's much easier to blame the other for what it is that they're not doing right than to really take ownership of, this is what I'm wanting, and this is where the relationship is not meeting my needs. And that's huge to
Yeah.
be able to know that and begin to articulate that. I'd say mostly, um, that's a courageous thing, and that's where I see the benefit of going to see a therapist, is they can help hold the space and maybe even give you some language about sharing what it is that you're feeling and noticing in those situations.
Right. And I was also thinking about people that get stuck into the blame of that person's, I'm telling that person my needs. They're not telling me, they're not meeting my needs. I keep telling them what they are. And to really be honest, like in two ways, right? The first way is um, whether you're actually creating the um, impasse by how you're like you're not going into repair and you're actually pushing the person away, sort of that distant pursuer cycle, or that we see so often in couples, or that there isn't a maturity of looking at your own piece in it. And so that mature reflection of like, am I really doing everything that I can? And if one has done everything they can, like I love this analogy of asking the person that you want to have a deep relationship with, like, hey, I can only give you the paddle, but you got to paddle with me if we're in the same boat, right? But if the person doesn't want to paddle,
Yeah.
and then you have to really accept that and if you really maturely address your part of what isn't working, like how you deal with what isn't working for you, um then I think there has to be an acknowledgement of that and a real um moment of truth, right? Of either staying in a relationship where you feel alone, or
Yeah.
getting out of a relationship that you feel alone to just embrace your own value.
Yes. Oh, yeah. And I'd say that to embrace your own value and to know that and live that is scary. And I would say then to be with that quality of being alone after being in relationship as one has for maybe many years, can be challenging. And that brings up its own difficulties and the letting go and the grief of, okay, this relationship no longer fits me in the way that I want to be held, and is it okay to let that go? um, there's a lot. Yeah, I love this perspective that you brought up, and I see that, and it's challenging being human.
It is because the opposite side of loneliness, right? Because we figure like every time we're in human suffering, there's always that other side of human suffering that is joy, right? That maybe having the joy or knowing what the joy is makes us suffer in the loneliness, right? So it's interesting. Like
Mhm.
I always think about when there is conflict or challenge in something, there's always the shadow side of that challenge, the other side of it. Maybe it's not the shadow, maybe the shadow is the challenge, and the other side is the what you're where you're trying to get to. Um,
Mhm. Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah. Mhm.
so this is kind of a moment of where do we go from here in this part of the conversation, because this is sort of where the idea of deepening relationship kind of shifts for a time if you're going into a separation period, and the deepening of the relationship shift is like actually deepening the relationship with yourself to get through that time.
True thing. Uh-huh,
Yeah.
yes. Uh-huh, yeah. So interesting because personally, I feel like this is where I'm at with my own life of having just broken up with my former fiance. And I feel like most of the exploration for me has been deepening into who I am and what is it that I desire, especially if there's no expectations, no demands, and no assumptions about who I am and how I need to show up, then who can I truly be? And that is absolutely liberating, right? I'm not beholden to anybody but myself, truly, in this stage of life. And then the utter, I would say, existential questions of then who am I, and what does it mean to be alone in the world, and am I really alone, and how do I proceed? Like, what is my greatest and truest
Yeah.
desire? Hmm.
Well,
And
you
what is my
also,
like?
when we talked earlier, you had mentioned that that had happened, because the time that I think we were talking before, you were very much happily in this relationship, and you said there was more things that keep a relationship together, um, and
Then
you
love.
yeah, then love. So I think we should probably identify what those are for our audience. Like, what are the things that keep a relationship together aside from love? Because then aren't we all kind of in all the love songs, we're kind of um meant to believe that love is all it takes.
I love that because my
Yeah,
little girl in my
we
heart
wish that
was
was
like,
true.
yeah.
Yeah. We want that to be true. So
Yeah.
what would you say when you think about your own experience about what else is there
Hmm.
that keeps it together?
Yeah, I think what I'm learning, really what I'm seeing now, and really what I'm living, is that there needs to be shared values and maybe even a shared mission of what it is that you're creating or co-creating together. And that without that, um, I'd say that it can be a little bit haphazard or chaotic. If one person wants to go one way and another person wants to go another way, and then how then to create unification or harmony in that, and it can be quite difficult or challenging. And so, in that, there can be a lot of love, but then are the choices in alignment with the values and the I mean, this kind of mission sounds not necessarily very heartfelt, but I believe that it is this kind of the sacred dream that we all hold for ourselves. And then how do we have that or live into that with our beloved? It's kind of how I imagine that. And sometimes we can, and sometimes we can't.
Hmm. So there needs to be more than just love. There is a co-creation of how you're envisioning life, what you're working on, and whether there's some kind of way of sharing that, you'd say, and maybe even like the lifestyle and how you set up your lifestyle, if it's sort of compatible enough. And then there's love too. I mean, there's love too, right? But
Yes.
there's it's
And
not,
maybe it begins with love.
yeah, it begins with love, right?
Yeah.
Right. So I wanted to go back to this place that we were talking about, that this very kind of deep emotional concept that came up in our conversation about true love and shared values, and whether it works and when it doesn't work, and how it's the loss of the dream, right? The loss of the vision that you had, the investment that you made with somebody. And I was just seeing and how that made you emotional. I wanted to, I asked you, whether you wanted to go there or not. And I think this is the place that a lot of people are afraid to go, and afraid to talk about out loud about how disappointing the loss of the dream is. Um, I know I often see very, very rarely, I would say 1 in 20 maybe, or 1 in 50 in my divorce support groups, that once in a while somebody gets back together, and it's the group dream that they would have an opportunity to go back and fix their relationship and work on it some more. Um, and so I wonder about what your thoughts about that, and how you might be processing that as a coach and as in your work, and how that affects your work and deepens your work.
Yeah. Yes. I am tearful and I do feel emotional. And there's no shame in that, right? It is just my experience. And I think that, or what I know, is that sometimes that sacred dream is not viable at this time, and that it's a sad, sad process of letting go and grieving. And for myself, it's just a burying of the dream, right? Like just letting it go and putting it into the earth. And with that, right, is the release, because something better will come. And my sense is that I can build a wall or I could cut off because of the pain. And I don't wish to do that. And so then, how can I step further into unconditional love without trying to control or dictate the circumstances? Because in my heart of hearts, I would love for my sacred dream to be as I dreamt it. And what I know is it is not today, and that
Mhm.
that's okay. And that to let it go is, again, to allow something bigger and better into my life, because what was no longer serves me and who I'm becoming.
Yeah, so there's that very rational part of knowing what's the steps to take to
Yes.
heal from the grief and to repair from the pain. And then there's that very almost like spiritual part of ourselves that has to also heal. So you know, we still have to go through that healing, like the burying the dream, like knowing that there's no, that wasn't the time for that dream.
Correct.
Mm.
Mhm.
I hang
Yeah.
out this really spiritual woman who I've known for many, many years, and we like walk a few whole days together a year. And she's just one of those people that you get the opportunity to meet in life, you know, that sort of show you the way that they think and believe. And she always talks about sometimes there's these karmic endings to relationships, and it's not anything you can stop, you know, that there's
Yeah.
like a certain time that relationships are there, and then there's a certain time that they're not. And just to reference back to the wedding, it's kind of funny that we're talking about, you know, together after, and when I just had a wedding weekend.
I
uh,
love it.
yeah, the wedding, that there's also those moments where you have these events that are never going to be there again. Like whoever showed up, whatever
Yeah.
happened, whatever the conversations were, it was all like the way it was supposed to be, you know.
Yes.
Like it will never be repeated ever in the same,
Ever.
right? And everybody was important to that sort of energy of what happened that weekend. It, you know, not like what's, you know, what stays, you know, what happens in Las Vegas stays in Las Vegas, not that part of it, but kind of that like almost like that mystical thing that sometimes happens. And so I really understand what you're talking about in terms of seeing the dream and having to bury the dream that you had about the connection that might have sustained. um and I always think about sometimes when I've had relationships with certain people that the only way they could sustain was if we were on an island and it wasn't the confusion of the world. Then maybe it could sustain, but that wasn't realistic because that's not real life. And so sometimes things don't last because of the pressure of life or the pressure that's put on them. You know, they're only like a dream, you know.
Correct. Yeah. Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah. And then to hold, I'd say, the sanctity of that experience of the marriage, of the wedding, knowing that all of these people were called and came forth and celebrated in that moment to create this experience. And that it's different than, yeah, whatever happened in Las Vegas dies in Las Vegas, right?
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Mhm.
So I'm really glad we went back to that moment because I know that that's something that the in my clinical practice people really struggle with is like, what do they do with the dream? You know, how do they release it? How do they move on from it? Because it sometimes haunts them a lot.
Yes, I think for myself and with my clients, what I see is just some acknowledgement of like it wasn't bad and it wasn't wrong, and that it was this gift of love. I think that there's really this opportunity to honor and respect what was, so then it actually can be released. Because oftentimes, again, coming to the blame, we it's easier to go back to this place of punitiveness, like it wasn't right, it shouldn't have been, I stayed in it too long, or something, something, something that's this form of self flagellation, or maybe flagellating the other that doesn't serve, but really this honoring and respect that it was love and that it was all of that. And now it's gone and that that's okay too. So, really, this deep acceptance that it was and how beautiful, or that we get to have these experiences as humans, and that now, again, that there's something else that will come from this compost, as is the cycle of life.
Right. And I think where I feel people get stuck is not knowing what they want next.
Because that's a mind thing.
Yes, it's a mind thing. Like what, you know, so sometimes people like, I don't know, don't want to date, I don't want to get into another relationship. So
Right.
I'm alone now. So then just what you
Yes.
said is like, am I going to deal with being alone now? And what does that mean? Am I really alone? Do I like my life the way it is? Do I like myself the way I am? Or am I ready to be sharing my time with somebody else again? And how do I want to do that? I think there is that question about what people want and maybe dreaming about what you want instead of really knowing what you want, you know?
Yeah, it's such a gift, I
Mhm.
believe, to be in the unknown because then the gestation could be filled with so many possibilities as opposed to knowing, which is only the one way. And I think in grief, right, as we lose a sacred dream, that there is this opportunity to just be with all that is and to not know because the mind dictates so much and it's exhausting.
Right. Right, which
Mhm.
is one of the things that I was saying earlier. I don't want to stop this part of the conversation because I feel like this is important around what the mind says and how the mind dictates the thinking about what's happening versus like what's in the unknown is so important. And it reminds me of in one of my groups where someone was talking about she had a bunch of elderly women that were around her during the time that she was going through her divorce, and they said stay single as long as you possibly can so you get to have an experience of yourself for a little bit longer than when you connect with someone else, because then that shifts and you don't, and sometimes it's like the most painful best time of your life, right? I remember when I was in between ending my long-term marriage and in between relationship, that it was the most painful and best time of my life because I had no one else to really worry about or schedule myself around. And then of course it was COVID, so it was incredibly painful because maybe it was too alone at the time, too isolated, but there was something in that was really important to go through. There was a discovery, that lots of discoveries that I was making. So, and I know sometimes people like just want to get out of that space so badly that they just get themselves busy or get themselves,
Mm.
dating and overstimulated and like just caught up with other people's stuff. And
Oh, yeah, true
yeah,
thing.
yeah, that they don't get to experience themselves again, experience like who they really are. Do you know who you really are? And do you like who you really are?
Yeah,
Or
and if you
are you
don't,
learning to
you
like
be
who you
okay with
really
that.
are?
Yes, uh-huh,
Yeah,
yeah. I
right.
love that. Great questions because this is the gift, I
Mhm.
believe, of really being with oneself that oftentimes we don't have. As I was saying earlier about I'm beholden to no one but myself. So there's no expectations or demands or assumptions placed upon me because nobody needs anything from me.
Right.
Mm.
And is that a place of torment for oneself, or is that a place of peace?
Mhm, mhm.
If you're used to somebody always wanting something from you, like, raising a family and having kids around and needs that you
Yes.
have to meet, and community needs, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I don't have to
Yeah.
have any of that.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, I'd
Now
say that it's a beautiful gift and it's a pathway to liberation if one allows it.
right. So going back to that image of like burying deep in the earth, like in
Yeah,
your mind's eye, that possibility of the relationship, the dream, the vision you had it didn't happen. It didn't sustain. So you bury it, and then you deal with what's there now with yourself.
correct. And what a wonderful opportunity to see all of the pieces that I have not been able to see before and begin to receive reflections from others in ways that I couldn't see them or feel them or hear them before because of the protective barrier or boundary of my former relationship. And now I'm receiving much more reflections from others who love and care about me. And it's really beautiful.
Yeah, that's great.
Mhm.
So I just do want to bring up this one thing that I'm hearing with a lot of my clients, and it's kind of this self-care thing that's been pretty big happening these days, which is like the cold plunge and the sauna combo. And I just think I just think one thing, well, firstly, I just want to go back and say if I go back to burying the thing that was lost, I actually want to plant a tree on it or a rose bush or something like that, because there's to symbolize like there's something else growing from there that's
Yeah.
it's going to be that it gives life, it gives new life. There's a lot of to learn that will grow new things, right, in your life. And maybe that symbolism will help. I don't know. It helps me to just know that there's something else that's growing, right? The whole
Yeah.
idea about the cold plunge making a rough bridge to the cold plunge is is this whole idea of self-care and the whole way that our nervous systems get so overstimulated in this world, especially since we're all so plugged in now. Um,
Yep.
but there is a mindset in self-care. So if anyone's here experienced like the cold plunge and the saunas combo, there is this mindset of like how we have to get over the anxiety that we hold. And I'm likening this to when you were talking about the whole idea about what our mind dictates us to think about. And this whole idea about when you're trying to do the cold plunge for at least 3 minutes, you have to stop thinking about how hard it is, right?
Yeah.
And that's
I love
almost like the
that.
time in between or the grief. Like it's just the anxiety that's making it hard.
Correct. Yeah. Oh, yeah. And can you relax into this experience
Right.
and really open up your heart in that experience? And can
Exactly.
you move? Yeah, because if you stay still in the cold plunge, you might create a little bit more insular protection and be a little bit okay. But then can you actually move in the cold water and feel the cold more deeply?
Right.
It's I love
Or
that.
maybe also you could add the breath to it. So if you just breathe through it
Mhm.
and
Yeah,
focus on your breath, then actually you can get through a lot of things. So we're giving a lot of symbolism out there, like breathing, moving. Don't stay like, just paralyzed in it because
correct.
that's the fear state, right? But
Correct.
try to relax into the parts of, I guess, life and relationships that are painful. There's parts of life and there's parts of relationships that are painful, and relax into it instead of, you know, stiffening up around it.
Yes. And I think the other piece that comes up for me too, and which I also see in my clients, is that difficult people, even when they're charming, are not healthy to live with. And that a toxic situation is a toxic situation. So even if you employ these skills of being with yourself and taking care of yourself, that sometimes it's really good to let them go. Right. So
Right.
there is that as well.
Exactly. And that's the mature adult mind talking, not
Correct.
the child that wants to be loved by the parent who's maybe not available, because sometimes I think we seek out maybe things that weren't healthy for us, that we need to make sure that we're reflecting on what was our part of that attraction, like why we were attracted to someone, not to blame ourselves, but to be very mindful and mature about our own reflection about ourselves in that. So we talked about a lot of things today.
We sure did.
And it's always good to sort of tease out. So I'll sort of write a blog about our conversation just to bat a few more ideas around, or develop a few more. But thank you so much for your contribution to having a conversation about these ideas. And some of them are challenging, and I just hope that the audience understands more about how you think and how you work, and about how I think and how I work. And there'll be a bio. Actually, your old interview will be put up aside this interview. So if people want to check out what we were talking about 4 years ago, in comparison, that would be great. But I'm really happy to talk to you today and to see you and go further in discussion with you again. It's always a pleasure, always an
Yeah.
honor to talk to you. So
Yeah. Thank you so much, Susan. I really appreciated the conversation and the depth and just the synergy. I love the ideas that you brought forth and the way
yes,
that you think about things. So thank you for sharing this time with me. Such a pleasure.
absolutely. Okay, take good care of yourself.
Thank you. You too.
Bye for
Bye.
now.